Jesus loved the little children. That's just a good quote for the day. So, for all the parents out there, if your children are making noise or if they're running up and down the aisles, that is a blessing. That is not bad. That is a good thing. So, that is the way church should be. That is the way we should be. So, I want to start off today talking a little more about God's grace. So 4 weeks ago when we had our homecoming, we had 80 people here for homecoming, which was fantastic. And I talked a little bit about God's grace that day, and what it means for God to have grace on us. And I kind of explained that grace is what they call unmerited favor. It's just the favor of God that is put upon us, even though we didn't do anything to earn it. And we don't really deserve it. It's just freely given by God to us. And I told a story that day about how there was a man who came to a fundraiser, and he was questioning the speaker about why should he give money to people he didn't know, to people he'd never met, to people he probably would never meet. And that speaker answered him by saying, Jesus loved you first. And that word first always stuck with me about that when I think about God's grace. It's what comes first. And during all the times when maybe we weren't close to God, Jesus was still loving us. Jesus was still there for us. And I bring this up again today because a baptism is really about God's grace. This is about asking in very simple terms God's grace to come and dwell within Edward and Henry and all of us as we say our baptismal vows. And honestly, that's all it really takes. It's not complicated. It's simple. We simply ask God to bless us. And God does. So there's two things I want to talk about baptism today. Two things I want to make sure I mention. I think the first one is that I probably wouldn't be a priest today if it wasn't for baptism. And I say that not because I got baptized, because I did at some point years ago. But when I started down this path to become a postulant in the Episcopal Church, I didn't really start off to be a priest. I started off to be called to be a deacon in the church. And if you know what deacons are, they're a very important role in the church. I'm not going into great detail today about it, but they bring the church to the people, and they bring the people to the church. And that's what I thought I was called to do. And it was in my first session at seminary in Swanee in Tennessee, and it was on the very last day before we were getting ready to go home, and they said, we're going to go to the cathedral, and we're going to practice baptism. And I thought, I'm a deacon, I don't need to do baptism. But we go to the cathedral, and it's this huge, beautiful place, and they have a baptismal font that's 10 times larger than ours. It's at least this big across, full of water. And I know it sounds kind of silly, but we practiced baptizing each other, reading the scripture from the prayer book, as practice for people who were becoming priests. And I was reluctant to get up there and do it because I knew I was going to be a deacon. But I really didn't know what the basis of that fear was. I didn't know where that was coming from. But when I got up there and actually said the words, and poured the water, and blessed the water, I realized I couldn't imagine being in the church and not doing baptism. And so I knew that I was on the wrong path. And later it was told me you weren't on the wrong path. You were just on the winding path, is what they call it. So I went back and started my whole process over to become a priest after that moment in baptism. So baptism has the power to change lives. It really does. And also the second thing I want to talk about baptism is this kind of interesting thing we do in the Episcopal Church, which they do in many churches. We baptize infants. It wasn't always that way in the church. In the first few centuries, if you wanted to become a Christian, you had to go through a course of study. You had to learn your scriptures. You had to learn your prayers. Sometimes it took years before people were baptized. But now, as I think we've gotten to learn a little more about God's grace and what God's grace really means, we baptize people as infants. And you may say, well, how can you do that? Are these infants really choosing God today? Their parents are. We know that much, right? But at their age, they don't do a whole lot except for make noise and eat and other stuff that we're not going to talk about here that you're all familiar with. And as they get older, one day they might not be very close to God. I mean, I pray they are. And we're going to pray that today for them. But, they might not be. They may fall away from God. They may not be close to God later in life. But what we need to remember is none of that really matters. Because it doesn't matter what we do. It's not about us. It's not about our actions. Because baptism is based on grace. It's God's grace that is given regardless of what we do. We can't turn it away. We can't stop it. We can't walk away from it. Even if we ignore it, it's still there. It's always going to be there. Even in those dark times when we don't think we're close to God, God is still there. In the gospel reading today, we see a great example of what God's grace really looks like. God's grace for Zacchaeus, and I had to Google to figure out how to say his name right this morning. Zacchaeus tells the story, Jesus tells us the story about Zacchaeus. And Zacchaeus is not a great person. He's a tax collector. He's a rich man. He doesn't really care about other people. He takes advantage of other people. That's what he's known for. And by the very end of the reading, Jesus says, today salvation has come to this house because he too is a son of Abraham. It didn't matter what Zacchaeus did. That didn't matter to Jesus. The other people grumbled and said, oh, he's going to eat with a sinner. He's going to stay at the sinner's house. His past didn't matter. And when we see the story, we know that he wanted to come see Jesus. And I like this part. He's too short to see over the crowd. I don't understand that, but I've told you that's a problem sometimes. You can't see over stuff. So he's short in stature, so he can't see over the crowd, so he decides to climb a tree. And he climbs his tree where he knows Jesus is going to pass by, just so he can see Jesus. And I think that's one of the first things I want to recognize. He reaches out to Jesus. Just like in the baptism today, we're going to reach out to Jesus. He reaches out. And Jesus sees him and calls him by name. That's the other thing I think is important. Jesus says, Zacchaeus, come down. How did Jesus know his name? I don't know. They don't really tell us whether he knew him before, whether he had a reputation, whether there was some reason that he would have known his name. He calls him down and says, I must stay at your house today. Jesus calls him down, welcomes him in, and goes to his house. And what happens to Zacchaeus? He's transformed. He's transformed by Jesus calling his name, staying at his house. And he comes in and says, I will give half of my possessions to the poor. If I've defrauded, if I've wronged anyone, I will make it right. I will pay back 4 times as much. He's transformed by his encounter with Jesus. And that's grace. He didn't deserve it. He didn't earn it. It was given. So what do we do with this message? Especially today. Because today is All Saints Day. And today is the day in the church we recognize what we call the communion of saints. And if we were saying the Nicene Creed, which we're not because we're doing a baptism today, if we were saying the Nicene Creed, we would say that we believe in the communion of saints. And it's this connection that says that all people who believe in Jesus are connected. If you believe in Jesus, you're part of the family. You are, as Jesus would say, a son of Abraham. You become part of the family. And that's not just in the present. It's in the past too. It's every Christian who has ever lived. It's every Christian who lives today, and it's every Christian who will live in the future. We're all connected as saints, and we celebrate that as being one community today in Christ. And the entrance to that community, the door to that community, is that very simple action. That very simple action that we're going to do today on behalf of Edward. We're simply going to ask God to come into their life. And we're going to say this prayer. We're going to say, Lord, fill them with your holy and life-giving Spirit. And then we're going to ask God, sustain them with your Spirit. Give them an inquiring and discerning heart, the courage to will and to persevere, a spirit to know you and to love you, and a gift of joy and wonder in all your works. Those are the gifts of the Spirit. Those are what we're asking for, and those are meant for every single person. Every single person. So, as we get ready to do this baptism in just a minute, I want you to remember how God's grace works in the world. This is what is laid out in the gospel for us. This is the message. This is the good news. God calls us first in love. Before we reach out to God, God is there already loving us. God calls us by name. Zacchaeus, come down from there. God calls you individually into that relationship. God forgives your past. Let the past go. Does not matter what we do. God restores us to God's family. We become sons of Abraham. We become beloved children of God. And then God sends us out as a new creation. Just like Zacchaeus was a new creation. And that is what the grace of God is really. And we're going to do that right now for Henry and Edward. So at this point in the service, we're going to proceed with the baptism so that we can proceed with the baptism.